Hello everyone and welcome to this narrated time-lapse of me making my Ludum Dare 43 game called Blót. If you're new to Ludum Dare, it's an event that occurs three times a year, and they're going to change it to twice a year now, and basically it's you get a weekend, 48 hours to make a game from scratch. So you have to make everything yourself, from the graphics, animations, to sound effects, music, and also the game development itself, including the concept of the game and all the mechanics. And in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about what went right and wrong when I made this game, and a little bit of my thought patterns. So the theme is always announced right upon when the time drops, when the time limit starts. So you got 48 hours from that time, and what I did was I searched just Wikipedia for the game theme. This time was sacrifices must be made. So that's why I went for this concept. And the first thing I did was I started to model. I knew I wanted to do something a bit of a Viking-like, and I like the low poly style, so I ended up starting up Blender while I was thinking about a game idea. I started to develop this Viking guy in low poly, and I had the idea that he would be collecting things to sacrifice for the gods, and especially the god Thor, and if you didn't please him, he would launch basically lightnings at you to punish you. I wasn't going to make a platformer originally. I was going to have it on a single screen where you run up and down, but it turned into a platformer in the end. After modeling the guy, I rigged him in Blender to create a bone structure. And I've done this a few times for Ludum Dare games now, so it starts to go fairly fast to make this, and I don't really have to look at the tutorials anymore so much. And I also did inverse kinematics for the legs, so I can animate him a little bit easier. And it went quite well with the rigging, and I could jump straight into animation after only a couple of hours of work so far. And I started to make a lot of different animations, jump animations, because I knew he would be jumping up and down. Originally I was going to have him jump around rather than running, so I focused a lot to make a decent jump animation that I could use a blend tree in Unity to fade in and out of when he jumps. And that's a technique I advise. Rather than animating the jump itself, I think it's good to blend between different jump poses based on the speed, the vertical speed. After that, I went into animating a run pose and then a jump pose as well. And I've done that a few times now as well. So it's starting to flow quite easy to make the different poses. It's only basically four keyframes for the different phases of the steps, and then you can do a paste of the in inverse paste as well, so to flip the sides, so it's quite easy. I also started to model some props like swords and axes and things like that, and I was going to have a fishing rod as well that I didn't end up implementing in the game, and this sword didn't actually make it either. And then continued with some of the other props like a piece of a log and the crops. And this is the first coffee break, so a few hours in. So Ludum Dare starts at 3 o'clock in the morning in Sweden on the night towards the Saturday. So at this time it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the kids woke up, so I spent some time with them and had my breakfast and things like that. Continued to model a fish that I also didn't end up implementing it in the game in the end. I just didn't have time to implement it, so I left it out. I was going to have him fish as well, but I had to cut that later on. And I also modeled a ladder that I didn't implement either, but I had the idea that he would be climbing up and down ladders between the platforms. This runestone, however, made it in, and that's what at the end of each level he reaches a runestone that you make the sacrifices to for the rest of the level to open up. So then it was time to play a little bit with the kids. I had to play with both my two daughters and my son, and played some cards and Barbie dolls with the girls and can't remember what I did with my son, but I think we just messing around a little bit in the house. And today we were going to go and buy the Christmas tree, so we were speaking about that. Every year it's been earlier and earlier that we get the Christmas tree, so we're already at the beginning of December when we get it now. But I think it's nice to get it, and then as soon as Christmas is over, I want to get rid of it and start the new year instead. So we're about 7.5 hours into the event, and I had modeled the Viking guy and the props that I was planning to have, and I did well, most of the animations, I think. And I wasn't actually thinking that I'd have so much time this weekend. I think I spent more time than I originally planned, actually, so I'm quite happy with that. I also made some low polygon trees, and that's also something that I made in the past, well, quite recently in the last few months, so the modeling process for that is fairly fast. The keystrokes I enabled, as you can see them flashing through, a lot of keystroke shortcuts there, and then I also modeled stones, which I've done recently, so those are quite fast to make as well. Did 5 of each, and then I thought I can rotate them in the screen. And then lunchtime, roughly 9.5 hours into the event, so most of the modeling was done. And I started to think a little bit more about the game itself, and I couldn't really think of any great mechanics or ideas, so I just kept pushing on with the idea of making this platforming game where you had to offer the crops. So I knew that what I had made I was going to be able to use to some extent. Then modeling the chopping motions was quite difficult. I had struggled quite a bit with getting the hands to stay correct and the rotation of the prop, but in the end I just had to accept whatever I had, and I think it looked good enough in the game. I've had some problems with Blender where it starts to delete, even though I pressed the little F icon to save the animations to the file. I've ended up quite a few times creating an animation that just magically disappears for some reason. So I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit more, why I lose animations. So now I'm making the fishing animation, which I didn't use, but this sickle motion to harvest the crops I did end up implementing. And then I added a backpack for him, so he could have something to run, and where he was keeping all the things that he picked up. I wasn't going to model any actions putting things in and out of the bag. Then I exported all the props to be imported in Unity, and then it was time to go and get the Christmas tree. So while this is showing us getting the Christmas tree, this is my 8th consecutive Ludum Dare that I've participated in, and I think every time this event comes around, it's really, I learn everything. Well, I learn things every time I participate, which is a really nice thing. Before I attended my first Ludum Dare, I thought, what's the point in spending 48 hours on a weekend to make a game that's probably not going to be that good to begin with? But I really understood after I participated in the first one how valuable this is. Basically, you get to see everything that's included in making a game from start to finish, and you underestimate a lot of the things, like implementing different game states, for example. I've said that many times in the past, and the game states, just to transition between them, handling loading and unloading of objects and levels, respawning after you die, for example, repositioning, things like that. So it's really, really useful, and I highly recommend anyone that hasn't participated in the Ludum Dare event to do so, or any game jam for that matter. Okay, back at modeling now, and or importing the objects into Unity. This was later on in the day, during the Saturday, so I had to run back and forth a little bit to the computer, and then spent some time with my son, we played some Space Quest 3 together. I haven't played this game in a long time, and I used to play it a lot as a kid, and my son's really into space like I am, so we had a good time playing that a little bit together. And then started to create the tiles in Unity, which is basically just assembling the stones and the grass objects to create 10 prefab tiles that I could reuse later on. And we're heading into the evening of the Saturday now, so reading some bedtime stories for my kids and getting prepared to continue the development. And then I continued to make a few more tiles. Added some. I ended up struggling here a little bit because the size or the scale of my armature was wrong, and really struggled to get that right. And you can't really resize it because it breaks all the animations. And when you import it into Unity, if it's not scaled one, you start having problems when you want to attach and detach child objects like the props, swords and things like that. So I spent a fair amount of time trying to fix that problem, but in the end I just had to live with it. I didn't have time to solve it, so I just had to rescale the props that I imported as a child object to make sure that they didn't grow or go smaller in size. And I also had some problems with the animation. Suddenly when the animation started playing, it became 100 times bigger, the object. So scaling from Blender to Unity has always been a real pain in the... And here's where I implement the blend tree for the jump animation and started to make an animator for the different transitions between running and the blend tree I think is a really nifty way to do. You have 4 poses when he jumps. So 1 when he jumps up, and then 1 when he reaches the top, and then 2 when he's falling down. And what you do is you create a variable that it's based on the vertical speed or velocity of the object, and then you use the blend tree to fade in and out based on his height. So you don't have a static jump animation, then it adapts to the gameplay quite nicely. Here I'm modeling the lightning, and I ended up going for the most simple approach. I was wondering if I was going to be able to solve it with the particle systems first, but I found the best solution was just to model a lightning and have it with a material that adds a lot of light. And for the background, as you can see, I made low resolution gradients that I scaled up and let the graphics card do all the scaling. And I think the result of doing it that way is I was quite happy with that. So I just keep a number of big boards in the background. That also worked in my favor because when the lightning has 2 point lights attached to it, and that actually lights up the sky panes behind it. So rather than having to do any post-process, it just looks like the lightning is lighting up the sky because it's lighting up the quad plane that's behind and with the sky texture. So I was happy with how that worked out. The clouds are particle systems with the icosphere mesh objects, and that just move along. And the rain that's falling as well is just a particle system with some stretched particles falling down. And we're 26 hours remaining, so half the time pretty much has been used up, and I haven't got any of the gameplay itself yet, but I did have all the graphics in place at this point, which was I felt that I could at least make something and submit to whatever level I got. Even if I had to cut time short, I thought, okay, I'll just adapt from now on. And time management is something that I've learned a lot during the Ludum Dares as well. So this was the 8th one, as I mentioned, that I've done. And I've always been able to submit something on time, and it's always been a complete game. So I think you can just pace yourself based on how much time you've got left. And even if you ended up doing something that you didn't have in mind to begin with, and you lose a few hours, you can just decide what features to cut out. And it's not so important as long as you can finish a completed game. Maybe one thing I usually left too long as well is creating levels, and I also did that this time because that takes quite a bit of time and troubleshooting. One good thing about creating levels this time is that I made it possible to skip into a specific level and start playtesting from there, which I hadn't done in my previous Ludum Dare games. And that was a real pain to make sure that to test that the levels actually worked. So now I can just skip forward and test level 2 or 3 or 4 and make sure that level worked. Yeah, time went to 24 hours before I went to bed. And yeah, I think I got a fair amount of hours into making the game this time, a lot more than I thought I had planned for, to be honest. So 24 hours in, halfway, and I knew the next day we were going to be doing some things as well. So I knew I didn't have a full day the next day, but I was fairly happy with what I had at the time, and as I mentioned, I think I could just pace whatever I had left then to make it into some playable game. I ended up making this animation just for the video, and I fast forwarded the time as well, so you could didn't have to sit and watch for too long. So running about 400 times the pace. 400 times of the already 100 times time lapse. Okay, the next day I continued with making different levels and started to make sure that everything could play all right. It wasn't until the second day that I started coding most part of the game. I didn't have to do any development in terms of writing code the day before. And I made the Viking Script, which controls jumping and different actions that he had to chop a tree. And what took some time was to create detection zones to detect when you're near a tree and when you're near crops, and also near the runestone. And then you can only do the different actions based on if you're close to a tree and you press the fire key, then he switches to the axe and starts chopping down the tree. And if you're close to the crops, he'll switch to the sickle tool and then harvest that. And then I also started to make the game state machine to be able to just create a simple menu where I have different panels that the game state machine enables and disables based on where, if you're, for example, in the menu, or if you started to play the game. And this is also something that I've done quite a few times now. The game state machines and the panel system works really well. And I just create buttons, so that's a shortcut to a state transition within the game. And this time I also made everything in one single scene in Unity. I didn't do any scene loading. So it basically just, when you click a button, it enables or disables different game objects. And time for food again. For this time around, as I mentioned, I didn't think I'd have as much time on my hand, and when I did start spending so much time on the graphics, I spent probably, I guess, 8 hours or so on just making the character itself and all the animations and the props. And I thought, I was quite concerned that I wouldn't have the ability to finish a game to the level that the graphic deserved, basically. So only 11 hours remain now, and not still much of a game itself. I had the mechanics was in place, but I still felt that the mechanics was missing something. So even just chopping the trees and running from the lightning wasn't fun enough. So I decided that I still had to make another model, which was this pole, pole spike that could impale you, to add a little bit more of a platform trickiness to the game. So I thought it was worth the time to create that and implement it, even though I didn't have much time on my hands. I thought that it would add enough to the game to make it more fun. In the evening, so only 10 hours remain, and I had promised my children they were going to go to see go to the cinema with a friend, and I had promised to wait outside because they're quite young, so it was the first time they went on their own. So I copied everything to my laptop, and I was planning to work there, but I didn't. I'm always slower working on my laptop, but I did synchronize the object, and I managed to implement basic ragdoll physics. So I could at least do that, and then synchronize the project back to my computer when I was finished with that. So when I got home, I could import the ragdoll and continue from there. I also thought that the ragdoll would be fun enough to have in the game, just so with the added pole mechanic there, to see him actually falling and tumbling when. Also, I thought it makes for some good visuals for promoting the game when you see little gifs or something like that, that he when he falls down between the spikes. So 6 hours remain now. I had added some more levels and transition to make sure that they could be played. And then I also thought I'd just make enough levels so that I think most people that play the Ludum Dare games only spend 5 to 10 minutes at the most, I guess. So I wanted to have enough levels for that to happen and for it to be fun enough for that period of time. And then if people like the game, I could always add a lot more to it later on. But for this purpose, I think 10 minutes of gameplay should be sufficient. I use animation curves a lot for controlling the spike mechanics. I thought it was quite nice to add a curve with a bounce feel to it. So when the spike hits, I could just set different parameters to have them bounce. Then it became time for music. Only 4.5 hours remained, and I struggled with the music a lot. I always find it difficult to produce music on short notice, and I couldn't get anything going that I was really happy with. So even about an hour in, I still didn't really have anything, and time ticking, and there's only 4 hours remaining. But then I started to get a little bit of a flow of what I needed to make, and I tested it with the game and played it a little bit over and over again. I still wasn't happy, but then I thought I'll just have to keep it for now, and I'm happier now the day after. I think it fits the game quite well, but when I was making it, I was really not happy with what I was listening to. But again, I just had to keep it in the way it was. So I spent about 2 hours on the music, and I still hadn't made the most of didn't have any sound effects in the game yet, and I didn't have any. You couldn't really complete the game. Oh yeah, here I recorded the sound effects as well with my little PCM M10 recorder. So I ran out to the garage and slammed some things together to produce the lightning. Yeah, I also hadn't at this point, I hadn't made it possible to complete the game or finish the game. That was something I also had to add. So 2 hours remained, and I started to get the sound effects in, the music was playing. I had most of the levels done, but I still had the game itself to make it into a completable game. So when you reach the last level, you need to be able to say basically it's a congratulations screen that brings you back to the menu. And I had 1 hour remains, and I think I'm still making the I had to make some title art as well, and I wasn't happy with that either, but it was good enough for the job. Credit screen, or I've always been from experience, I've learned that I also have to include something how to play the game. So, and just doing the finishing touches now in the last half hour to make the title screen, the credit screen, and the how to play screen, and then a final play test as well to make sure everything played all right. So yeah, that was it. I just finished it on the very minute and submitted it. Recorded this video and I hadn't really fully played the game all the way through. But the following morning when I got up, someone had actually made a Let's Play video of this game already, and I looked at it with great anticipation and suspense to see if I saw any bugs. And that particular playthrough went really well, and it didn't produce any bugs. I did see some in the comments that people mentioned that there were some, I think some localization with the tree chopping, for example, and where they reached the runestone, but I haven't encountered any of those bugs myself yet. But I think there are probably a fair number of bugs hiding in here somewhere. So I'll make a post Ludum Dare version to iron out any bugs, and I'm also adding a timer component because I want to have a little competition with the speedrun, so you can win something and see how fast you can complete this game. So again, thanks a lot for taking the time, and I hope you found it interesting to see this time-lapse of how my game Blót was made, and some of the challenges that I encountered during the way, and I hope it's encouraging you to participate in game jam events such as Ludum Dare yourself. It's a real good learning experience. So if you have any questions or comments, please post it in the comments below, and if you like this video, don't forget to hit a thumbs up. And you can follow me on Twitter, and my handle there is @Infencia. So until next time, and Ludum Dare 44, take care and have a great time, and I'll speak to you later. Bye!